Hello Magic Makers, I'm Mombierella, and today, in honor of Frozen 2, I'd like to share with you Elsa's origin story, The Snow Queen, by Hans Christian Andersen, a fairy tale in 7 stories. Third story, The Flower Garden, of the woman who knew the art of sorcery. But how were things with little Gerda, now that Kai no longer came? Where could he be? No one knew. No one had anything to tell. The boys could only say that they'd seen him tie his small sled to a magnificent large sleigh that drove off into the street and out at the city gate. No one knew where he was. Many tears were shed. Little Gerda wept profoundly and a long time. Then they said that he was dead, had drowned in the river that ran close to the city. Oh, these were drawn out, dismal winter days. Then spring came, and the sun grew warmer. Kai is dead and gone, little Gerda said. I don't believe it, the sunshine said. He's dead and gone, she said to the swallow. I don't believe it, the swallow answered. And finally, little Gerda didn't either. I put on my new red shoes, she said one morning. Kai's never seen them. And I'll go down to the river and ask it. It was quite early. She kissed her old grandmother, who was asleep, put on the red shoes, and went all on her own out of the city gate to the river. Is it true that you've taken my little playmate? I will give you my red shoes, if you will return him to me. And the waves, she thought, nodded so strangely that she took off her red shoes, her most precious possession, and flung them, both of them, out into the river. But they fell close to the shore, and the small waves bore them back to her on the land. It was as if the river did not want to take the most precious things she owned, because it did not have little Kai. But she now thought that she hadn't thrown the shoes far enough out, and so she crept up into a boat that lay in the reeds, went right out to the farthest end, and threw the shoes out. But the boat wasn't fixed to anything, and this moment of hers made it start to glide away from the land. She noticed this and hurried to get off, but before she could escape from the boat, it was a couple of feet out and now slipping faster away. Then little Gerda felt quite scared and started to cry, but no one heard her except the house sparrows, and they could not carry her back to the shore. But they flew alongside it and sang, as if to comfort her. Here we are! Here we are! The boat drifted with the current. Little Gerda sat quite still, in her stocking feet, her small red shoes floating behind. But they couldn't reach the boat. It started to move faster. It was beautiful on both the shores, lovely flowers, old trees, slopes with sheep and cows, but not a single person in sight. Perhaps the river will carry me to where little Kai is, Gerda thought, and that put her in a better mood. She sat up and gazed for many hours at the beautiful green shores. Then she came to a large cherry orchard, where there was a small house with strange red and blue windows, not to mention a thatched roof, and outside 2 wooden soldiers that presented arms to anyone sailing past. Gerda called out to them. She thought they were alive, but they didn't answer, of course. She came quite close to them. The current brought the boat straight in towards the land. Gerda called out even louder, and then an old woman came out of the house, leaning on a stick curved at one end. She was wearing a large sunbonnet, and on it the loveliest of flowers had been painted. You poor little child, the old woman said. How on earth have you ended up on the swift-flowing river, carried far out into the great wide world? And the old woman went right out into the water, caught hold of the boat with the curved end of her stick, pulled it ashore, and lifted little Gerda out. And Gerda was glad to get back onto dry land, though a bit afraid of the strange old woman. Come and tell me who you are, and how you come to be here, she said. And Gerda told her everything, and the old woman shook her head and said, And when Gerda had said everything to her and asked her if she hadn't seen little Kai, the woman said that he had not passed by, but that he was sure to do so, and that she was not to be sad, but to taste her cherries, look at her flowers. They were more beautiful than any picture book, and each of them could tell an entire story. Then she took Gerda by the hand. They went into the small house, and the old woman shut the door behind them. The windows were high up, and their panes were red, blue, and yellow. The daylight shone so strangely inside. There was every color, but on the table were the loveliest cherries. And Gerda ate as many of them as she wished, for she dared to do so. And while she was eating, the old woman combed her hair with a golden comb. Her hair curled and shone so beautifully round the small, friendly face that was so round and resembled a rose. "I've so longed to have such a sweet little girl," the old woman said. "Now, you shall see how well the two of us are going to get on with each other." And while she combed little Gerda's hair, Gerda forgot more and more of her playmate, Kai. For the old woman was a sorceress, but not an evil one. She only did magic for her own pleasure, and now she wanted to keep little Gerda. That was why she went out into the garden, stretched her curved stick out towards all the rose trees, and no matter how beautifully they were blooming, they all sank down into the black earth, and no one could see where they had once stood. The old woman was afraid when Gerda saw the roses, she would think of her own, and then remember little Kai, and run away. She now led Gerda out into the flower garden. Oh, how fragrant, and what loveliness! Every conceivable flower, and for every season of the year, stood here in all its glory. No picture book could be more many-colored and lovely. Gerda jumped for joy and played until the sun set behind the tall cherry trees. Then she was given a lovely bed with red silk duvets that were filled with blue violets, and she slept and dreamt in it as sweetly as any queen on her wedding day. The next day she could play again with the flowers in the warm sunshine. And many days passed like this. Gerda knew every kind of flower, but no matter how many there were, she felt that one was missing. But which one she was unable to say. Then one day she was sitting, looking at the old woman's sunbonnet, with the flowers painted on it, and the most beautiful of them all happened to be a rose. The old woman had forgotten to take off her bonnet when she spirited away all the others down into the ground. But that's how it goes when one hasn't collected all one's thoughts. "What's this?" Gerda said. "There aren't any roses here." And she sprang in between the flower beds, searching and searching, but there were none to be found. Then she sat down and cried. But her warm tears fell precisely where a rose tree had sunk into the ground, and when the warm tears watered the soil, the tree shot up again, as much in flowers as when it sunk down, and Gerda embraced it, kissed the roses, and thought of the lovely roses back home, and when she did so, she also thought of little Kai. "Oh, how long have I delayed?" the little girl said. "I was on my way to try to find Kai. Don't you know where he is?" she asked the roses. "Do you think he is dead and gone?" "He is not dead," the roses said. "We've been in the ground where all the dead are, but Kai wasn't there." "Thank you, all of you," little Gerda said, and looked into their calices and asked, "Don't you know where little Kai is?" But every flower stood there in the sun and dreamt of its own fairy tale or story. Gerda got so very many of them, but not one knew anything about Kai. And what then did the orange lily say? "Can you hear the drum? Boom, boom. There are only two notes. Always boom, boom. Listen to the woman's dirge. Listen to the priest cries." In her long red sari, the Hindu wife stands on the pyre. The flames rise up around her and her dead husband, but the Hindu woman thinks of the living one, here in the circle, of him whose eyes burn more fiercely than the flames, of him whose eyes fire reach her heart more than the flames that soon will turn her body into ashes. Can the heart's flames die in the flames of the funeral pyre? "I don't understand that at all," little Gerda said. "That is my fairy tale," the orange lily said. What does the convolvulus say? "Out over the narrow mountain road hangs an old baronial castle. Dense periwinkles grow old round its old red walls. Leaf by leaf up around the balcony, where a lovely girl stands, she leans out over the balustrade and gazes down the road. No rose hangs fresher from its branches than she does, no apple blossom. When the wind carries it from the tree, floats down lightly when she does. How magnificently her silken dress rustles. Isn't he on his way yet?
Do you mean Kai? Little Gerda asked.
I'm only talking about my fairy tale, my dream, the convolvulus answered. What does the tiny snowdrop say?
Between the trees on a rope hangs the long board. It is a swing, 2 delightful young girls. Their dresses are as white as snow. Long green silk ribbons flutter from their hats. They are swinging. Their brother, who's taller than they are, is standing up on the swing, his arm round the rope to keep his balance. For in one hand he's holding a small bowl, in the other a clay pipe. He's blowing soap bubbles. The swing swings. The soap bubbles fly out in lovely, changing colors. The last one is still hanging on the pipe stem and bending in the breeze. The swing swings. The little black dog, as light as the bubbles, gets up on its hind legs and wants to join them on the swing. It flies. The dog tumbles down, barks, and is angry. It's been duped. The bubbles burst. My song is a swinging board, a bursting picture of foam.
What you tell me may well be beautiful, but you say things in such a mournful way, and don't mention Kai at all. What does the hydrangea say?
There were 3 lovely sisters, so transparent and fine. The first one's dress was red, the second one's blue, the third one's completely white. Hand in hand they danced by the still lake in the bright moonlight. They were not elves, they were human children. There was such a sweet scent, and the girls went off into the forest. The scent grew stronger. 3 coffins, in which the lovely girls lay down, glided out from the thicket out across the lake. Glowworms flew around them, glimmering like small floating lights. Are the dancing girls asleep, or are they dead? The flower scent says they are corpses. The angelus rings out over the dead.
You make me feel quite sad, little Gerda said. You have such a strong scent. I have to think of the dead girl. Oh, is little Kai really dead? The roses have been down in the ground, and they say no. Ding dong, the bells of the hyacinths rang. We do not toll for Kai. Him we do not know. We are just singing our song, the only one we know. And Gerda went over to the buttercups, which could be seen gleaming among the shiny green leaves. You are a bright little sun, Gerda said. Tell me if you know where I can find my playmate. And the buttercup shone so beautifully, and looked at Gerda once more. What song could the buttercups perhaps sing? It was not about Kai either.
Down into a small yard, God's sun shone so warmly on the first day of spring, its rays slid down the neighbor's white wall. Close by the first yellow flowers were growing, gleaming gold in the warm rays of the sun. Old grandmother was outside in her chair. Her granddaughter, the poor lovely maid servant, came home on a short visit. She kissed her grandmother. It was gold, the heart's gold, in that delightful kiss. Lips touched with gold, made of gold, heart made of gold, gold on high ere the day is old. Now that was my little story, the buttercup said.
My poor old grandmother, Gerda sighed. Yes, she's sure to be longing for me, worried about me, as she was for little Kai. But I'll be back, soon, and I'll have Kai with me. Asking the flowers isn't any help. All they know is their own song. They can't tell me anything. And so she tied up her little skirt so that she could run faster. But the narcissus struck her over the leg as she jumped over it. Then she stopped up, looked at the tall yellow flower and asked, Do you know something perhaps? And bent down to it. And what did it say? I can see myself. I see myself, the narcissus said. Oh, what a fragrance I have. Up in the small attic room, high-dressed, a little dancer is standing. Now she's standing on one leg, now on 2, and kicks her heels at the whole world. She is Merely an optical illusion. She pours water from the teapot into a piece of clothing she is holding. In her bodice, cleanliness is next to godliness. Her white dress is hanging on its hook. It has also been washed in the teapot and dried on the roof. She puts it on, the saffron yellow scarf round her neck. Then her dress gleams even whiter, legs in the air. How she struts on one stem! I can see myself! I can see myself!
I don't care about that, Gerda said. That's nothing to tell me about.
Then she ran to the edge of the garden. The door was shut, but she wriggled the rusty hasp till it came loose, and the door swung open, and then little Gerda ran off on her bare feet into the great wide world. She looked behind her 3 times, but no one followed her. Finally she couldn't run any longer, and she sat down on a large stone. When she looked around her, the summer was over. It was late in the autumn, that she had not been able to notice in the lovely garden, where there was always sunshine and flowers of every season.
Good Lord, how delayed am I? Little Gerda said. It's autumn already? I daren't rest for a moment.
She got up, so as to continue. Oh, how her small feet were sore and tired, and everything around her seemed to be cold and raw. The long willow leaves had turned quite yellow, and mist dripped from them in drops of water. One leaf after the other was falling. Only the black thorn still had fruit on it, and that was so sour it made one purse one's lips. Oh, how gray and heavy it was in the great wide world. 4th story, The Prince and Princess. Gerda had to take another rest. Then a large crow hopped over the snow opposite where she sat. After sitting there for a long while, looking at her, and waggling its head, it said, "Caw! Caw! Good day! Good day!" That was the best it could manage. But it was so well-meaning with the little girl, and asked her where she was headed, alone in the great wide world. The world alone. Gerda understood perfectly well, and was well aware how much meaning lay in it. And so she told the crow about herself and her entire life, and asked if it hadn't seen Kai. And the crow nodded very thoughtfully and said, "Could well be, could well be."
"What, do you really think so?"
the little girl shouted, and almost squeezed the crow to death. So fervently did she kiss it. Steady now, the crow said. "I think I know. I think it might just be little Kai. But now he's probably forgotten you. For the princess."
"Does he live with a princess?"
Gerda asked. "Yes, listen," the crow said. "But it's hard for me to talk your language. If you understand how crow language, I can tell you better."
"No, I haven't learnt it," Gerda said. "But grandmother knew it, and she knew P language too. If only I'd learnt it."
"No matter," the crow said. "I'll tell you as best I can, but it won't be all that good even so." And then he told her what he knew. That in the kingdom we're now sitting in, there lives a princess who is immensely clever. But then, she's also read all the newspapers that exist in the world, and forgotten them again. She's that clever. The other day, she's sitting on her throne, and that's not all that much fun, people say, when she happens to start humming a tune that is precisely this one. "Why shouldn't I get married? Hey, that's not a bad idea," she says, and was so eager to get married. But she wanted to have a husband that knew how to answer back when talked to. One that didn't just stand there looking fine, for that's so boring. So she had all her ladies-in-waiting drummed together, and when they heard what she asked, they were so pleased. "I like this," they said. "I was thinking something similar only the other day." "Believe you me, every word I'm telling you is the truth," the crow said. "I have a tame sweetheart who's free to walk around the palace, and she told me everything." His sweetheart was a crow too, of course, for birds of a feather flock together, which in this case always means a crow. The newspaper immediately came out, edged with hearts and the princess's monogram. There people could read that any young man who was handsome was free to come up to the palace and speak with the princess, and the one who spoke in such a way that one could hear he belonged there, and who spoke best, the princess would take as her husband. "Yes, yes," the crow said. "Believe you me, it is certain as I'm sitting here. People flocked to the palace. There was such a hustle and bustle. But there was no success on either the first or the second day. All of them were well about to speak when they went out on the street. But the moment they entered the palace gate, saw the lifeguards all clad in silver, and on the staircase the footmen clad in gold in the huge illuminated halls, they were taken aback, and as soon as they were there before the throne, where the princess was sitting, all they could manage was to repeat the last word she had said, and she wasn't interested in hearing that again. It was as if people in there had taken snuff and it had fallen into their stomach, and they had fallen into a trance, until they were back in the street. Yes, then they could talk all right. There was a long line right from the city gate to the palace. I was in there to have a look myself, the crow said. They grew both hungry and thirsty, but they didn't get so much as a glass of lukewarm water from the palace. The wisest of them had admittedly taken some sandwiches with them, but they didn't share them with the man next to them, for they thought, just let them look hungry, then the princess won't take him.
But Kai, little Kai, Gerda asked. When did he come? Was he among all those many people?
Be patient, be patient. We are just coming to him. I was on the third day, when a little fellow turned up, without horse or carriage, marching quite unperturbed right up to the palace. His eyes shone like yours. He had lovely long hair, but apart from that, poor clothes.
That was Kai, Gerda shouted with joy. Oh, so now I've found him, and she clapped her hands.
He had a small knapsack on his back, the crow said.
No, that must have been his sleigh, Gerda said, for he had a sleigh with him when he left.
That may well be, the crow said. I didn't look all that closely, but I know from my tame sweetheart that when he came in at the palace gate and saw the lifeguards all in silver, and on the staircase the footmen all in gold, he wasn't the slightest bit overawed. He nodded and said to them, It must be boring standing on the stairs. I think I'd rather go inside. There he came to halls glittering with light. Privy councillors and excellences walked along on their bare feet and carried gold dishes. The more ceremony the better. His boots creaked so terribly loud, but he wasn't the slightest bit afraid.
That's Kai, all right, Gerda said. I know he had new boots. I've heard them creaking in Grandmother's room.
Well, they certainly did creak, the crow said, and he walked as calmly as you please right up to the princess, who was sitting on a pearl as large as a spinning wheel, and all the ladies in waiting with their maids, and the maids' maids, all the lords in waiting with their servants, and servants' servants, with their pages, stood lined around her. And the closer they stood by the door, the prouder they looked. The servant's page, who always wears slippers, is almost impossible to look at, so proudly does he stand at the door.
That must be horrible, little Gerda said. And Kai won the princess? Even so then.
If I hadn't been a crow, I'd have taken her myself, despite the fact that I'm engaged. He must have spoken as well as I'd be able to, when I speaks crow's language. I have it from my tame sweetheart. He was unperturbed and dashing. He hadn't come at all to propose, only to hear the princess's cleverness, which he liked, and she liked him in return.
Oh, yes. It's Kai, all right, Gerda said. He was so clever. He could do mental arithmetic with fractions. Oh, wouldn't you take me in where the palace lies? Won't you?
Yes, that's easily said, the crow replied. But how do we set about it? I'll have a word with my tame sweetheart. She can surely advise us, for I must tell you that such a little girl as yourself will never be allowed to be properly inside.
Oh, yes, I will, Gerda said. When Kay hears that I'm here, he will come out immediately and fetch me.
Wait for me in the stile over there, the crow said, waggled its head and flew away. The crow didn't return until darkness had fallen. Wah, wah, it said. I'm to give you her many greetings. Here's a small piece of bread for you. She took it from the kitchen, where there's plenty of bread, and you must be hungry. It's not possible for you to get inside the palace, for you are barefoot. The lifeguards in silver and footmen in gold wouldn't allow it. But don't cry. We'll get you up there. Even so, my sweetheart knows of some back stairs that lead up to the bedroom. She knows where to get hold of the key. And they went into the garden, into the avenue, where one leaf fell after the other. And when the palace lights went up, one after the other, the crow led Gerda to the back door that was ajar. Oh, how Gerda's heart pounded with fear and longing. It was as if she was about to do something bad, and in fact all she wanted to do was find out if it really was Kai. Yes, it had to be him. She thought so intensely of his intelligent eyes, his long hair. She could clearly see how he smiled, like he did when they sat back home under the roses. He would of course be glad to see her. Hear about the long way she had come for his sake? Know how sorrowful everyone at home had been when he didn't return. Oh, she felt both joy and fear. Now they were on the staircase. A little light was burning in a cupboard. In the middle of the floor stood the tame crow, and it turned its head in all directions and observed Gerda, who curtsied, as her grandmother had taught her. "My fiancé has said such nice things about you, little miss," the tame crow said. "Your Vita, as it is called. It's also extremely moving. If you will take the lamp, I will lead the way. We will take the direct route, for we will not encounter anyone there."
"I think I can hear someone right behind us," Gerda said.
And it swished past her. It was like shadows along the wall. Horses, with flowing manes and thin legs. Hunting lads, gentlemen, and ladies on horseback. "It's only dreams," the crow said. "They come to fetch the thoughts of the royal household out hunting. A good thing, as you can then easily observe them in bed. But let me see. If you gain glory and honor, that you then display a grateful heart." "That's nothing to talk about," said the crow from the forest. They now entered the first hall. It was of rose-pink satin, with imitation flowers up the walls, where the dreams already shot past them, but at such a pace that Gerda did not catch a glimpse of the royal household. Each hall was finer than the previous one. Yes, it really took one's breath away. And now they were in the bedroom. Here the ceiling was like a tall palm tree with leaves of glass, precious glass, and in the middle of the floor, on a golden stalk, hung 2 beds, each of which looked like a lily. The one was white. In it the princess lay. The other was red, and in it was here that Gerda was going to look for little Kai. She turned aside one of the red leaves, and then she saw a brown nape of a neck. Oh, it was Kai! She called his name out quite loud, held the lamp close to him. The dream swished on horseback back into the room. He woke up, turned his head, and it wasn't little Kai. It was only the back of the prince's neck that resembled him, although he was young and handsome. And the princess looked out from the white lily bed and asked what was happening. Then little Gerda cried and told them her entire story, everything that the crows had done for her. "You poor little thing," the prince and princess said. They praised the crows and said they weren't the slightest bit angry with them, but they shouldn't make a habit of it. They were, though, to have a reward. "Do you wish to fly freely?" the princess asked. "Or would you like a permanent position at court, as court crow, with everything left over in the kitchen?" And both the crows bowed and asked for a permanent position, for they thought of the future, and said, "It's a good idea to have something for one's old age," as they put it. And the prince got out of bed and let Gerda sleep in it. He could not do more. She folded her small hands and thought, how good creature humans and animals are. And then she closed her eyes and slept profoundly. All the dreams came flying in once more, and then they looked like God's angels, and they pulled a small sleigh, and on it sat Kai and nodded. But all this was merely dreaming, which is why it had all disappeared again when she woke up. The next day she was dressed from top to toe in silk and velvet. She was invited to stay at the palace and have a pleasant time, but all she asked for was to have a small carriage with a horse in front and a pair of small boots, and then she would be off again into the great wide world to find Kai. And she was given both boots and a muff. She was so finely clothed, and when she wanted to set off, a new coach of pure gold was standing at the door. The arms of the prince and princess shone from it like a star. Coachmen, servants, postilions, for there were also postilions, sat dressed in gold crowns. The prince and princess helped her into the carriage themselves and wished her every success. The forest crow, which had now got married, accompanied them the first 20 miles or so. It sat next to her, for it couldn't travel backwards. The other crow stood at the gate and flapped its wings. It didn't accompany them, for it had a headache, since it now had a permanent position and had eaten too much. Inside the coach was lined with sugared pretzels, and there were various types of fruit and small spicy biscuits in the seats. "Goodbye, goodbye," the prince and princess cried out. And little Gerda cried, and the crow cried. That is how the first many miles passed. Then the crow said goodbye, also. And that was the hardest farewell, and it flew up into a tree and flapped its black wings as long as it could still see the carriage, which gleamed just like bright sunshine. To be continued. Thank you so much for listening today. Please come back tomorrow for the next part of the story.
If you haven't had a chance to yet, please like, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and share with a friend. Thank you so much for your support. And remember, let it go and keep moving forward. Have a magical day. Bye.